My name is Hugh Peterson, 67 years old, and I never thought my own flesh and blood would betray me like this. My daughter Stephanie was always the apple of my eye, the one person I trusted completely. But trust can shatter in an instant, especially when someone close to you steals your identity for a $785,000 loan to buy a mansion for her scheming husband. If you have ever felt the sting of family betrayal, you will understand what I went through. Drop a comment about your own experience, and subscribe to hear how I turned the tables on my daughter's deception. I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood in Portland, where nobody had much, but everybody worked hard. My father spent 40 years at the shipyard, coming home with calloused hands and a tired smile. He taught me that everything worth having required sweat and sacrifice. By the time I was 16, I was working construction jobs after school, learning the trade that would eventually become my livelihood. When I started my own construction company at 29, I had exactly $3,400 to my name and a pickup truck that broke down every other week. But I had something more valuable than money, a reputation for honest work and fair prices. Within 5 years, Peterson Construction had 20 employees. By the time I turned 50, we had grown to over 100 workers and were handling major commercial projects across 3 states. Through it all, I lived by one financial principle: if you cannot afford it, you do not buy it. I watched competitors rise and fall because they borrowed too much, trying to grow too fast. My company grew steadily because we only expanded when we had the cash to do it. No over-leveraging, no risky loans. My employees used to joke that I had an allergic reaction to debt. They were not far wrong. Marion came into my life during those early company years. She walked into my office looking for a job as an administrative assistant, and I hired her on the spot. 6 months later, we were dating. A year after that, we were married. She became the backbone of the company, handling everything from payroll to client relations while I focused on the building side. We were partners in every sense of the word. Our daughter Stephanie came along 3 years into our marriage. From the moment the nurse placed her in my arms, I was completely wrapped around her tiny finger. Marion and I had planned on having more children, but complications from Stephanie's birth made that impossible. Maybe that was part of the problem. Maybe we spoiled her too much because she was our only child. As a little girl, Stephanie had everything her heart desired: dance lessons, horseback riding, summer camps, private school. But she was such a sweet child that the spoiling did not seem to affect her character. She would climb into my lap after work and ask about my day with genuine interest. She made cards for the workers when they had birthdays. Everyone at the company adored her. The changes started in her teenage years. Suddenly, the clothes we bought were never quite good enough. Her friends all had newer phones, fancier vacations, better cars. No matter what we provided, there was always something more she wanted. I tried to teach her the value of money, making her work summer jobs at the company office, but the lessons never quite stuck. Marion saw it clearer than I did. "She thinks money appears by magic," she would say with worry in her voice. "She does not understand what it takes to earn it." But I always defended Stephanie. She was young, I reasoned. She would learn responsibility in time. Then came college. Stephanie chose an expensive private university 3,000 miles away. We could afford it, so we paid. When she called saying she needed extra money for books, we sent it. When she wanted to study abroad for a semester, we covered that too. Looking back, I should have questioned more, should have asked for receipts or budgets, but I wanted to trust my daughter. Marion got sick during Stephanie's senior year of college. Pancreatic cancer, already stage 4 when they found it. Stephanie came home for 2 weeks, then returned to school, claiming she could not afford to miss classes. Marion and I faced the grueling treatments alone. My wife fought bravely for 2 years before the cancer finally took her. Stephanie flew in for the funeral, stayed 3 days, then left again, saying she had job interviews she could not reschedule. The loss of Marion left a gaping hole in my world. I threw myself into work, expanding the business even further, though my heart was not in it anymore. Stephanie called occasionally, usually when she needed money for rent or to pay off credit card debt she had accumulated. Each time I sent what she asked for, grateful for any connection to my only child. She met Greg at some networking event in Boston. He was a real estate agent with big ambitions and bigger promises. The first time I met him, warning bells went off in my head. He wore an expensive watch, talked endlessly about luxury properties he was selling, and somehow managed to mention his Mercedes convertible 6 times in one dinner conversation. But Stephanie looked at him like he hung the moon, so I kept my reservations to myself. Their wedding was extravagant, far beyond the budget we had agreed upon. When the final bills came in at nearly double the original estimate, Stephanie seemed surprised that I was upset. "Dad, it was my special day," she said, as if that explained everything. I paid the bills without further comment. After the wedding, the financial requests became more frequent and larger. They needed help with a down payment on their starter home. Greg had a sure-thing investment opportunity that required cash quickly. Their car broke down and needed replacing with a new luxury model. Each time, they promised to pay me back. Each time, the repayment never materialized. I tried bringing it up once, asking when I might see some of the $60,000 I had loaned them over 2 years. Stephanie burst into tears, accusing me of not caring about her happiness. Greg smoothly interjected, explaining that his latest real estate deal was just about to close, and they would pay me back with interest very soon. I apologized and left without pressing the issue further. As the months passed, I heard from them less and less, except when they needed money. My calls often went to voicemail. My invitations to visit were met with excuses about their busy schedules. I told myself they were young, building their lives, that this distance was normal. But deep down, I knew something was wrong with our relationship. I just did not want to admit how transactional it had become. The last time I saw Stephanie before everything fell apart was at a brief lunch 3 months ago. She seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly. When she asked if she could stop by my house later to pick up some childhood mementos she suddenly wanted, I was so pleased by her interest that I immediately agreed and gave her my spare key. She came by when I was out grocery shopping, leaving a note saying she had found what she wanted and would return the key next time we met. I had no idea then that this simple act of trust would lead to the biggest betrayal of my life. The morning my world turned upside down started like any other. I made coffee, grabbed my reading glasses, and settled at the kitchen table to sort through my mail. Bills, advertisements, charity requests, the usual mix. Then I noticed an envelope from Pacific Northwest Bank, an institution I had never done business with. Thinking it was just another credit card offer, I almost tossed it aside. Something made me open it instead. Inside was a statement for a loan payment. My name was at the top, along with my address and social security number. The monthly payment amount made me choke on my coffee. $7,238. The outstanding principal balance, $785,000. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of mistake, or perhaps an elaborate scam. I called the bank immediately, ready to report fraudulent activity. The customer service representative asked for verification of my identity, which I provided, growing more irritated by the minute. "Yes, Mr. Peterson. I can confirm this loan was opened in your name 3 months ago," the representative said calmly. "The funds were disbursed on March 15th. This is your 3rd monthly statement." "That is impossible," I insisted. "I never took out this loan. I have not applied for any loans in years." There was a pause on the line. "Sir, we have all the proper documentation on file. The application was submitted online, but you came into our downtown branch to sign the final paperwork. We have copies of your driver's license, social security card, and 2 forms of additional identification." My stomach dropped. "I need copies of everything you have. This is fraud." The bank promised to send all documentation immediately and opened a fraud investigation. I hung up feeling dizzy and sick. Someone had stolen my identity to secure a loan of nearly $800,000. 3 payments had already been made. which meant whoever did this had access to funds. But who would have access to all my personal information? Who could copy my signature convincingly enough to fool a bank? The answer came the next day when the loan paperwork arrived by express mail. The signature on the documents was a decent forgery, close enough to pass a casual inspection. But what made my blood run cold was the handwriting on the application form. I recognized it immediately. I had seen that precise handwriting on birthday cards, school assignments, and thank you notes for over 30 years. My daughter had forged my signature. With shaking hands, I went to my home office and checked the locked drawer where I kept important documents. Everything appeared to be in order, but looking closer, I could see slight differences in how papers were arranged. My passport had been moved. The folder containing my social security card and birth certificate was slightly askew. She had not even been careful about putting things back exactly as she found them. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Stephanie had used the key I gave her not to collect childhood mementos, but to steal my personal information. She had methodically gathered everything she needed to impersonate me at the bank. The daughter I raised, the child I had sacrificed for and loved unconditionally, had committed identity theft against me for $750,000. The pain in my chest was so intense, I wondered if I was having a heart attack. I sat down heavily in my office chair, trying to breathe through the shock and betrayal. How could she do this to me? What kind of person had my daughter become? When the initial shock subsided, I called Jack Harmon, my attorney and friend of 30 years. His response was immediate and forceful. "Hugh, this is a serious crime," he said after I explained the situation. "Identity theft, forgery, fraud, these carry serious penalties. She is my daughter, Jack." My voice broke on the words. Jack was silent for a moment. "I understand this is painful, but you need to protect yourself. Before you confront her, we need to know exactly what she did with that money and what other financial damage might be lurking." He was right, of course. If Stephanie had gone this far, there might be other fraudulent accounts or loans I did not know about yet. I agreed to let Jack start a thorough investigation before making any moves. That night was the first of many sleepless ones. I lay awake replaying every interaction with Stephanie and Greg over the past few years, seeing warning signs I had willfully ignored. The extravagant lifestyle they could not possibly afford on their stated incomes. The constant need for loans that were never repaid. The way they always seemed to have new luxury items while claiming financial hardship. How had I been so blind? The next day, I ordered complete credit reports from all 3 major bureaus. The results were another shock. There had been multiple credit inquiries in my name over the past 4 months. The loan from Pacific Northwest was the largest, but there were applications for 3 credit cards as well. Fortunately, those had been denied due to the large loan that had just been approved. Small mercies. As the full picture of Stephanie's betrayal came into focus, grief gave way to something harder and colder. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment or a desperate act in a time of crisis. This was calculated, premeditated theft from the person who had given her everything, and I was determined to find out exactly what she had done with my money. Jack recommended a private investigator named Frank Morales, a former detective with the Portland Police Department who specialized in financial crimes. Frank was a stocky man with salt and pepper hair and eyes that missed nothing. He listened to my story without interruption, taking occasional notes in a small black notebook. "Family fraud cases are the worst," he said when I finished. "But they have one advantage from an investigative standpoint. The perpetrator usually does not expect to get caught, so they get sloppy." Frank wasted no time. Within 48 hours of taking the case, he had traced the loan proceeds to a real estate purchase in West Hills, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Portland. The property was a sprawling 5-bedroom house on 2 acres, with mountain views and a 3-car garage. According to county records, it had sold for $950,000, with my loan covering most of the purchase price. "Your daughter and her husband put down $165,000 in cash to complete the purchase," Frank told me, sliding property records across the table. "The interesting part is, whose name is on the deed?" I looked at the document and felt another stab of betrayal. The house was titled solely in Greg's name. Not even Stephanie was on the deed. They had used my credit, my identity, and my good name to secure a property for my son-in-law alone. There is more, Frank continued. I did some digging into your son-in-law's background. Greg has a history of financial problems he has kept hidden. 3 years ago, he filed for bankruptcy in Massachusetts under a slightly different name, Gregory Alderson, instead of Greg Alderman. He also has significant gambling debts in Atlantic City and Las Vegas, close to $200,000 according to my sources. The picture was becoming clearer and uglier by the minute. So they used my credit to buy a house because his was too damaged to qualify for a loan. Frank nodded. That appears to be the case. But there is another angle we should consider. The renovation permits filed with the city suggest they are doing major upgrades to the property, particularly things that increase resale value. My guess is they are planning to flip the house, using my money for the purchase and renovations, then pocketing the profit when they sell, I said. The scheme now obvious. Exactly. And if they default on the loan, you are left holding the bag. I asked Frank to keep digging while I processed this information. Later that afternoon, I drove by the West Hills address. Sure enough, construction vehicles filled the driveway, and workers swarmed over the property. I parked down the street and watched, trying to reconcile the beautiful house before me with the ugly deception that had purchased it. As I sat there, a truck from Portland Luxury Kitchens pulled up. The driver got out and consulted a clipboard before approaching the job foreman. I rolled down my window, straining to hear their conversation. Another rush job? The foreman asked. Yeah, clients want everything installed by next weekend. They are moving in Sunday afternoon, paying extra for the expedited work. Moving in next weekend. My daughter and her husband were just days away from settling into their fraudulently obtained dream home. A home purchased with a loan that would eventually ruin my credit, drain my savings, and potentially leave me bankrupt in my retirement years if I had to pay it off. The next morning, I met with the fraud department at Pacific Northwest Bank. They were sympathetic but cautious. Yes, they would investigate. Yes, this appeared to be fraud. But the documentation was thorough, the loan funds already disbursed, and my relationship to the suspected perpetrator complicated matters. They could not simply cancel the loan or stop payments because the money was already gone. Legal proceedings would be necessary. From there, I went to the district attorney's office with Jack. The assistant DA who met with us explained that identity theft cases involving family members were unfortunately common and particularly difficult. The defense often claims it was a misunderstanding or that permission was implicitly given, she explained. Juries sometimes struggle with sending family members to jail, especially in cases where the victim initially seems reluctant to press charges. I am not reluctant, I said firmly. I want to pursue this to the fullest extent, she nodded. Then we will need comprehensive documentation and clear evidence that you never authorized your daughter to take this loan in your name. As we left the meeting, a plan was forming in my mind. The legal process would take months, possibly years. Meanwhile, Stephanie and Greg would be enjoying their luxury home, perhaps even selling it for a profit before justice could catch up with them. I needed more immediate action. Jack, I want to be there when they move in, I said as we walked to our cars. My friend gave me a concerned look. Hugh, that might not be wise. Confrontations can get messy, and anything you say could potentially complicate the legal case. I am not going to do anything stupid, I assured him. But I need to see their faces when they realize they have been caught. I need that moment. Jack sighed, knowing me well enough to recognize I would not be dissuaded. At least let Frank be nearby when you do it, for safety. I agreed to that condition, then called a locksmith friend who had done work for my construction company for years. I explained a simplified version of the situation. My daughter had purchased a house using my name and credit without permission, and I needed access to the property before confronting her. After assuring him this was being handled legally through my attorney, He agreed to make me a key based on the lock brand and code from the building permits Frank had obtained. That night, I wrestled with the moral implications of what I was planning. Was I crossing a line by entering the house before confronting Stephanie? Would this undermine the legal case against her and Greg? But the alternative, waiting months for the slow wheels of justice while they lived in luxury, purchased with my stolen identity, was unacceptable. I needed to face them on my terms, in the house my credit had bought. I called Frank with my decision. I want to be inside that house when they arrive on Sunday. I want to see their faces when they realize they have been caught. There was a pause before Frank responded. As your investigator, I should advise against that. Another pause. As someone who has seen too many financial predators walk away unscathed, I understand the impulse. If you are determined to do this, let me help you do it safely. We spent the next 2 days planning the confrontation carefully. Frank would make sure I could access the gated community. I would enter the house before they arrived. Frank would remain nearby, ready to intervene if things went badly. We would document everything legally. As Sunday approached, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For too long, I had been the naive father, the open checkbook, the safety net for my daughter's increasingly outrageous financial demands. That ended now. It was time for Stephanie and Greg to face the consequences of their actions, and I would be there to witness it firsthand. Saturday morning, the day before the confrontation, Frank called with good news. I have got a temporary access code for the community gate. My contact says it will work for 48 hours. Perfect, I replied. And you are sure the house will be empty today? Positive. The contractors finished yesterday. Final cleaning crew left at 6. Nobody is scheduled to be there until the moving truck arrives tomorrow at noon, followed by your daughter and son-in-law at 2. I packed a small overnight bag with essentials. This would be the strangest stakeout in history, spending the night in a house purchased with my own stolen identity, waiting to confront the thieves who happened to be my flesh and blood. Frank picked me up at 11, and we drove to the West Hills neighborhood. The houses grew larger and more ostentatious as we climbed the winding roads. Finally, we reached an imposing gate with a guardhouse. Frank punched in the code, and the gates swung open silently. I will be parked here until 2 tomorrow, Frank said as he dropped me at the house. Call if you need anything before then. The house was even more impressive up close. Stone and timber exterior, massive windows, professionally landscaped gardens. A far cry from the modest 4-bedroom home I had lived in for 40 years, the home where I had raised Stephanie. The key worked perfectly. I stepped into a soaring entry hall with marble floors and a crystal chandelier. The air still smelled of fresh paint and new carpet. I walked through the house in a daze, taking in the extravagant details. A kitchen with commercial-grade appliances and stone countertops. A primary bedroom suite, larger than my entire first apartment. A home theater room with recessed lighting and built-in speakers. I sat on a window seat overlooking the manicured backyard and tried to process the emotions swirling within me. Anger at the betrayal. Grief for the daughter I thought I knew. Disgust at the excess surrounding me, purchased with stolen money. My mind drifted to all the things this money could have done legitimately. It could have secured my retirement, allowing me to travel as Marion and I had always planned. It could have been a proper inheritance for Stephanie after I was gone, or a college fund for grandchildren I hope to have someday. Instead, it had been stolen to create this monument to materialism. I unpacked my evidence file on the dining room table, spreading out the documents methodically. The fraudulent loan application with Stephanie's handwriting and my forged signature. The property records showing the house in Greg's name only. The credit reports showing the unauthorized inquiries. The bank's initial fraud investigation findings. The police report I had filed. All of it arranged neatly, irrefutable evidence of their crime. Next to this damning file, I placed a framed photograph of Marion. She was smiling in our backyard garden, sunlight catching her auburn hair, her eyes crinkling with laughter. The last good summer before cancer took her. I wanted her presence there when I confronted our daughter. I needed her strength. With nothing left to prepare, I wandered through the empty house again. In what would presumably be Stephanie's home office, a stack of interior design magazines sat on a built-in desk. Post-it notes, marked pages with furniture and decor items, most with eye-watering price tags. A leather-bound planner lay open, with tomorrow's date circled and the notation, "Moving Day, New Beginning," written in Stephanie's familiar handwriting. The same handwriting that had forged my signature on a loan document. As evening fell, I realized I had not eaten all day. I unwrapped the sandwich I had brought and ate it standing at the kitchen island, looking out at the sunset over the mountains. Under different circumstances, this view would have been breathtaking. Now it just felt tainted. I decided to sleep in the living room, where I could hear anyone approaching the house. I unrolled my sleeping bag on a plush carpet that probably cost more than my first car. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by memories of Stephanie as a child. Stephanie at 7, sitting on my shoulders at a 4th of July parade, squealing with delight at each passing float. Stephanie at 12, proudly showing off the birdhouse we had built together in my workshop. Stephanie at 18, radiant in her graduation gown, full of dreams and promise. Where had that girl gone? How had she turned into someone who could steal from her own father without apparent remorse? Morning arrived with soft light filtering through enormous windows. I packed away my sleeping bag and washed up in one of the guest bathrooms, then put on the suit I had brought. Not my everyday attire, but this confrontation called for formality. This was, after all, a kind of business meeting, the business of consequences. Frank texted at 10. Moving truck scheduled for noon, still on track. I will be in position by 11:30. I replied with a simple, "Understood." I spent the next hour rehearsing what I would say. I wanted to be calm, controlled, factual. No yelling, no accusations that could be dismissed as the rantings of a confused old man. Just the plain truth, followed by the consequences I had decided upon. At 11:15, I called my neighbor Bill to check on my house. "Everything's fine here, Hugh," he assured me. "You sure you are okay? You have seemed stressed lately." "I am working through some family issues," I told him, the understatement of the year. "I should be home tomorrow." At noon precisely, I heard the rumble of a large truck outside. From my position at a second-floor window, I watched movers unload furniture and boxes, designer sofas, artwork in gilt frames, a king-sized bed that required 4 men to maneuver through the front door. The trappings of a lifestyle built on fraud. I moved to my chosen spot, an armchair in a shadowed corner of the living room, partially hidden from the entry hall but with a clear view of the front door. There I sat with Marion's photograph in my lap, waiting for the architects of this betrayal to arrive. My phone vibrated with a text from Frank at 1:45. They just pulled up to the gate, driving a new Range Rover. Etta, 5 minutes. I took a deep breath and steeled myself for what was coming. This would be the most difficult confrontation of my life, but also the most necessary. It was time for truth, time for justice, time for my daughter to finally face consequences. The crunch of tires on the circular driveway broke the silence of the empty house. Car doors slammed, followed by excited voices approaching the front entrance. I remained perfectly still in my shadowed corner, hands folded calmly in my lap, Marion's photo now positioned on the side table beside me. Keys jingled in the lock. The massive front door swung open, revealing Stephanie and Greg backlit by afternoon Sunday. They stepped into the foyer, arms around each other, not yet noticing me in the dimmer interior. "Welcome home, Mrs. Alderman," Greg said, his voice echoing in the marble entryway. Stephanie squealed with delight, spinning in a circle to take in the soaring ceiling and crystal chandelier. "I cannot believe this is really ours." Greg pulled a bottle of champagne from a leather tote bag. "I have been saving this for today. Our first night in our dream home." They walked further into the house, moving toward the kitchen, still oblivious to my presence. I remained silent, listening. The movers did a great job with the furniture placement, Stephanie remarked, running her hand along a sleek dining table that had been installed while I watched from upstairs. Greg popped the champagne cork with a loud report. "To us," he said, filling 2 crystal flutes, "and to playing it smart financially." Stephanie giggled. "Dad would have a heart attack if he knew what this place cost." "What he does not know will not hurt him," Greg replied, clinking his glass against hers. "Besides, with the way the market is moving, we will be able to sell this place for a cool $1 million more within 2 years. The loan will be paid off, and nobody will be the wiser." That was my cue. "I would not count on that," I said clearly, not raising my voice. The effect was electric. Stephanie gasped and dropped her champagne glass, which shattered on the hardwood floor. Greg whirled toward my voice, champagne bottle still clutched in his hand. "Dad?" Stephanie's face drained of color. "What are you doing here? How did you get in?" I stood slowly, moving into the light. "Oh, you did not expect to see me? That is interesting, considering this house was purchased with a loan in my name." Greg recovered first, stepping in front of Stephanie. "Hugh, this is a misunderstanding. We were going to surprise you, invite you over next week to explain everything." "Save it, Greg," I said coldly. "I have all the documentation right here." I gestured to the dining table where my evidence file lay open. Loan applications with forged signatures. Property records showing the house in your name only. Bank statements, credit reports, police reports, everything. Stephanie pushed past Greg, her shock giving way to desperate placation. "Daddy, please, we can explain. We needed help with financing, but we were always going to make the payments. You would never even have known about it. Never known that my own daughter committed identity theft? Never known that my credit was used to secure a loan of nearly $800,000? Never known that my financial security was put at risk without my knowledge or consent?" With each question, my voice grew harder. Greg attempted a different approach. "Hugh, be reasonable. This is just a temporary arrangement. The market in this neighborhood is booming. We will sell at a profit. Pay off your loan, and everyone wins." I laughed without humor. "Except the bank has frozen this property pending a fraud investigation, and the district attorney is very interested in your history of financial crimes, Greg. Or should I call you Gregory Alderson, the name under which you filed bankruptcy in Massachusetts?" His face contorted with shock. "You had no right to dig into my past. Just as you had no right to steal my identity," I countered evenly. Stephanie began to cry, theatrical sobs that once would have melted my resolve. "Dad, please, we were desperate. Greg had some gambling debts, and my credit cards were maxed out. We just needed a fresh start." "So you decided to commit a felony against your own father?" I asked, my calm facade finally cracking. "The father who paid for your education, who helped with your first house down payment, who has given you over $60,000 in the past 2 years alone. We were going to pay you back everything," she insisted. "This house was going to solve all our problems." Greg's demeanor suddenly shifted, his salesman charm disappearing. "You know what? Screw this. You have always been holding the purse strings over Stephanie's head, making her beg for every penny. We just took what should have been hers anyway." Stephanie looked at him in horror. "Greg, stop." But he was just getting started. "You are a millionaire several times over from your business, living in that modest house, driving a 5-year-old car. Meanwhile, your only daughter has to scrape by. We just balanced the scales a bit early." I maintained my composure, even as internal rage threatened to boil over. "Is that how you justify stealing? By convincing yourselves you deserve what belongs to someone else?" "We did not steal anything," Greg shouted, his face reddening. "We were making the payments." "With what money, Greg?" I asked quietly. "The $200,000 you owe to casinos in Atlantic City and Vegas? Or perhaps with more loans taken out in my name?" His eyes widened, and I knew I had hit the mark. "How do you know about that?" "I know everything," I said simply. "I know about the bankruptcy you hid from me. I know about the credit cards Stephanie opened in her mother's name after she died. I know about the renovation permits for this house that total another $150,000. I know it all." Stephanie collapsed onto a bar stool, her performance giving way to genuine panic. "Dad, I am sorry. It got out of control. Greg said nobody would get hurt, that we would sell the house before you ever found out about the loan." Greg rounded on her. "Do not pin this on me. It was your idea to use your father's credit. You said he would never check because he trusts you completely." They turned on each other, hurling accusations and revelations that confirmed my worst suspicions about their relationship and financial schemes. I let them continue, silently activating the voice recorder app on my phone that Frank had suggested I use. Finally, Stephanie turned to me, mascara streaking down her face. "Dad, please. We will fix this. Just give us a chance to make it right. I am your daughter, your only child. You cannot do this to me." "I am not doing anything to you, Stephanie," I replied softly. "You did this to yourself. And to me." "So what happens now?" Greg demanded, his earlier rage fading into calculation. "We all just walk away and forget this happened? You would not send your own daughter to jail?" I reached into my jacket pocket and removed an envelope. "You have exactly 2 options. Option 1. You both sign this confession I had Jack prepare, admitting to identity theft and fraud. You surrender any claim to this property, and you enter financial counseling and addiction treatment for Greg's gambling. You pay restitution according to a payment plan we establish." "And option 2? Greg asked, a dangerous edge to his voice. "I press charges for identity theft, fraud, and forgery. The evidence is overwhelming. You both face potential prison time. Stephanie loses her professional license. Your real estate license would certainly be revoked, Greg." Greg took a threatening step toward me. "Or option 3. You leave now, old man, and forget any of this happened. You really want to destroy your relationship with your only child over money. That is pathetic." I stood my ground. "Actually, there is something you both should know. This entire confrontation has been recorded." I held up my phone. "Additionally, Frank Morales, my private investigator and former police detective, is outside with 2 officers waiting for my signal." I stepped toward the window and raised the blinds. Frank stood on the front lawn with 2 uniformed officers, arms folded, watching the house. Stephanie crumpled to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably now. "Dad, please, I will do anything. I cannot go to jail." Greg looked frantically between Stephanie, me, and the officers outside. His face hardened into a mask of hatred. "This is not over, Hugh. Nobody ruins me and gets away with it." "You ruined yourself, Greg," I replied. "I am just making sure you do not take my daughter down with you any further than you already have." I pulled out my phone and texted Frank. "Come in now." Within moments, Frank and the officers entered the house. Greg immediately began proclaiming his innocence, claiming I had given verbal permission for the loan. The officers looked to me. "The loan application with the forged signature is on the dining table," I said calmly, "along with all other evidence. And I have a recording of both of them admitting to the fraud just now." As the officers began reading them their rights, Stephanie looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Dad, how could you do this to me?" The question nearly broke me. But I thought of Marion, of what she would say in this moment, and found the strength to respond. "I am not doing this to you, Stephanie. I am doing this for you. Someday, I hope you will understand the difference." The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements, evidence collection, and legal procedures. Greg and Stephanie were taken to separate police cruisers. Greg continued to protest loudly, threatening lawsuits and revenge. Stephanie walked with her head down, silent tears streaming down her face. Neighbors had begun to gather on the street, drawn by the police presence in their exclusive community. I recognized the irony. Stephanie had always craved status and recognition, and now she was certainly getting attention, though not the kind she wanted. Frank stayed by my side throughout, handling most of the procedural details, while I struggled to process the emotional aftermath of the confrontation. "You did the right thing, Hugh," he said quietly, as we watched the police cars drive away. "It does not feel like it now, but you did." I nodded numbly. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was fading, leaving me feeling every one of my 67 years. "I need to go home," I told Frank. On the drive back to my house, my phone began buzzing constantly with calls and messages. News traveled fast. Stephanie's sister-in-law called first, then my brother, then friends from church. I let everything go to voicemail. I could not bear to explain the situation again. By evening, I had spoken only to Jack, giving him a brief account of what had happened. He promised to meet me the next morning to discuss next steps legally. "The bank will begin foreclosure proceedings on the property," he explained. "Since the loan was fraudulently obtained, they will work with the DA's office on how to proceed. You will need to decide how far you want to push the criminal charges." That night, alone in my house, the weight of what had happened finally hit me fully. I sat in my recliner, the same chair where I had once cradled infant Stephanie, and wept for the daughter I had lost, long before today's confrontation. Somewhere along the way, the sweet girl who made cards for my employees had transformed into a woman who could steal from her own father without remorse. Where had I gone wrong? The doorbell rang around 9, startling me from my dark thoughts. I opened it to find Amanda, Stephanie's younger sister from Marion's first marriage. Though technically a stepdaughter, I had raised her from age 3 and always considered her my own. "I heard," she said simply, pulling me into a fierce hug. "Mom would be so proud of you for standing your ground." I broke down again at her words, and she guided me back to the living room, where we sat talking until well after midnight. Amanda revealed that Stephanie had borrowed money from her too, nearly $10,000 that was never repaid. She had also suspected Stephanie of stealing jewelry from their mother's collection during her last visit. "She has been spiraling for years, Dad," Amanda said gently. "Greg accelerated it, but the seeds were there long before him. This is not your fault." The next morning brought a call from a local news reporter asking for comment on the prominent builder whose daughter committed identity theft. I declined to speak with them, but it was clear the story was becoming public. By afternoon, 2 news vans were parked on my street. Jack arrived with coffee and a plan. "The DA wants to move forward with charges against both Stephanie and Greg. Given the amount involved and the clear evidence, they are looking at potential felony convictions." "And if I do not want to press charges against Stephanie?" I asked, still torn about sending my daughter to jail despite everything. "The bank will still pursue fraud charges, but your position would likely influence the sentencing recommendations," Jack explained. "Greg is in a different situation. His prior financial crimes make a plea deal less likely." Later that day, I received a call from the fraud department at Pacific Northwest Bank. They had frozen all accounts associated with Stephanie and Greg and were proceeding with legal action to recover the loan amount. The house would be seized and eventually sold, though the legal process would take months. "We appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Peterson," the fraud investigator said. "Unfortunately, cases of family fraud are all too common, but few victims are willing to come forward, as you did." My parents called from their retirement community in Arizona. At 89 and 91, they were devastated to learn what their granddaughter had done. "We should have been stricter with her when she was young," my mother lamented. "We all gave her everything she wanted. It was not your fault," I assured them, though I was still struggling to believe it was not mine either. By the end of the week, Stephanie had been released on bail, which was paid by a friend, not me. She called repeatedly, but I was not ready to speak with her. Greg remained in custody, unable to make his higher bail amount and facing additional charges related to other financial schemes Frank had uncovered during his investigation. I finally answered one of Stephanie's calls 10 days after the confrontation. Her voice was small, subdued in a way I had never heard before. "The public defender says I should take a plea deal," she said. 2 years probation, restitution payments, and financial counseling. No jail time if I testify against Greg. "And what do you think about that?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "I think I deserve worse," she whispered. "Dad, I do not expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know I am sorry. Really sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for betraying you." It was the first genuine thing she had said to me in years. The following weeks brought a cascade of legal meetings, paperwork, and difficult decisions. Greg hired an expensive attorney who tried to claim his client was unaware of the fraudulent nature of the loan. This strategy collapsed when presented with the recorded admissions from the confrontation. He eventually accepted a plea deal that included 18 months in prison, 5 years probation, and restitution payments. Stephanie accepted her plea deal, avoiding jail time but accepting full responsibility legally. The terms included 200 hours of community service, mandatory financial counseling, and a restitution schedule that would take years to fulfill. The luxury house was seized by the bank and eventually sold at auction for less than the loan amount, leaving a deficiency that was added to Stephanie's restitution obligations. The furnishings they had purchased were also liquidated to pay creditors. Stephanie moved in with a college friend, taking a job as a waitress after losing her position at a marketing firm when news of her conviction became public. Greg filed for divorce from jail, claiming Stephanie had manipulated him into the scheme. A final betrayal that seemed to wake her up to the true nature of their relationship. 3 months after the confrontation, Amanda convinced me to attend a support group for victims of family fraud. There I met others who had experienced similar betrayals. Parents, siblings, grandparents, all struggling to reconcile their love for family members with the harm those same family members had inflicted. "The hardest part is not the money," said Eleanor, a 72-year-old woman whose son had stolen her life savings. "It is the loss of trust. How do you ever trust again after something like this?" I had no answer then. But as the weeks passed, I found unexpected healing in helping others. I began volunteering with a nonprofit that educated seniors about financial scams and identity theft. Telling my story helped others recognize warning signs I had missed, and there was a certain redemption in that. 6 months after the confrontation, I agreed to meet Stephanie for coffee at a neutral location. She arrived early, visibly nervous, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, a far cry from the designer clothes she had once considered essential. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, eyes down on her cup. "I know you did not have to. How are you doing?" I asked, genuinely wanting to know. "Taking it day by day. The financial counseling is actually helping. I never realized how messed up my relationship with money was." She paused. "I miss Mom a lot lately." She would have seen through Greg immediately. "Yes, she would have," I agreed. "Your mother always could spot a con man from a mile away." We talked for almost 2 hours, more honestly than we had in years. There were difficult moments, tears on both sides, but also glimmers of the daughter I had thought was lost forever. Not the same innocent girl, but perhaps someone who had finally begun to grow up at 34, forced into maturity by consequences that could no longer be avoided. As we prepared to leave, Stephanie asked the question I had been dreading. "Can we ever fix this, Dad? Can you ever trust me again?" I looked at my daughter, seeing both the child she had been and the troubled woman she had become. "Trust has to be rebuilt slowly, Stephanie. It requires consistency, honesty, and time." "A lot of time," she nodded, accepting this hard truth. "I would like to try, if you will let me." I did not make promises I could not keep, but I agreed to another meeting the following month. It was a small step, but perhaps the beginning of a new kind of relationship built on reality rather than enablement and deception. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but for the first time since discovering that fraudulent loan statement, I felt something like hope, fragile but present, not for an instant restoration of what was lost, but for the possibility of something new that might eventually heal. 1 year after the confrontation at the West Hills house, I sat in the courtroom watching as Stephanie completed her final restitution hearing. The judge reviewed her progress. Consistent payments, all community service hours completed, perfect attendance at financial counseling sessions, and glowing reports from her probation officer. "Miss Peterson," the judge said, using the maiden name Stephanie had reclaimed after her divorce from Greg, "the court is satisfied with your compliance and progress. Continue on this path, and you will complete your probation successfully in 12 months. Outside the courthouse, Stephanie looked lighter somehow, as if a burden had lifted. "One more year," she said. "Then I can apply to have my record sealed." "You have done well," I told her, meaning it. The transformation over the past year had been remarkable. Not instant, not without setbacks, but steady and genuine. Greg had served 10 months of his 18-month sentence before being released on parole. He immediately left Oregon for Florida, violating the terms of his release. Last we heard, there was a warrant out for his arrest, but Stephanie had no contact with him anymore and no desire to know his whereabouts. Our relationship had taken a different path. The weekly coffee meetings had become a constant in both our lives. Sometimes awkward, sometimes painful as we worked through the damage done, but increasingly comfortable as a new foundation formed. My work with the Senior Financial Protection nonprofit had expanded into a second career of sorts. 3 times a week, I spoke at community centers and retirement homes about recognizing financial exploitation, particularly from family members. My story resonated with audiences, and several people had come forward after my talks to report their own situations of abuse. "You have helped so many people, Hugh," said Margaret, the nonprofit director, after a particularly emotional session where an elderly man revealed his grandson had been draining his accounts. "Your willingness to be vulnerable about your experience has given others courage." The support group I had reluctantly attended had become an important part of my healing process. Over time, my role evolved from new member, seeking help, to mentor offering perspective to others just beginning their recovery journeys. The hardest lesson for me, I told a woman whose daughter had stolen her identity for credit cards, was accepting that I could not have prevented this by loving more or giving more. Some people have wounds we cannot heal for them, no matter how much we love them. Amanda and her family had become even closer to me during this period. Her children, my grandchildren in every way that mattered, spent weekends at my house regularly. Amanda had initially been reluctant to allow Stephanie back into their lives, but over time, as Stephanie's changes proved consistent, a cautious reconnection had begun. "Mom would be proud of both of you," Amanda told us after a family dinner where Stephanie had been included for the first time. She always believed people could change if they really wanted to. Financially, I had implemented extensive safeguards. My accounts had fraud alerts and regular monitoring. I had changed all passwords, locked down my credit, and kept important documents in a safe deposit box. These precautions were not just about protecting myself from Stephanie, but about being wiser about financial security in general. On the anniversary of the confrontation, I invited Stephanie to my house for dinner, the first time she had been there since everything happened. As we ate on the back patio, overlooking the garden Marion had loved, we talked about the changes of the past year. "I never thanked you," Stephanie said suddenly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me completely. For pressing charges instead of enabling me again. For giving me the chance to face consequences while I could still change." She looked down at her plate. "It would have been easier for you to just pay off the loan and sweep it all under the rug." "Easier in the short term," I agreed. "But it would have solved nothing. You and Greg would have found another scheme, another way to avoid responsibility. And eventually, it would have ended much worse. I know that now." She was quiet for a moment. "I have been thinking about Mom a lot lately, about what she tried to teach me about money and values. I wish I had listened." "She would be proud of who you are becoming," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. Stephanie looked up, tears in her eyes. "Do you really think so? Your mother always believed in redemption, in the possibility of change. She would have been heartbroken by what happened, but she would have celebrated your courage in facing it and growing from it." After dinner, as Stephanie prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Dad, I know trust takes time. I know things will never be exactly like they were before, but I want you to know that I am committed to this path, to being someone you can be proud of again someday." I hugged my daughter, feeling the complicated love of a parent who has seen both the worst and the best of their child. "We are already on that road, Stephanie, one step at a time." As I watched her drive away, I reflected on the painful journey of the past year. The betrayal had nearly broken me, had shaken my faith in my own judgment and in the values I thought I had instilled in my child. But from that breaking had come unexpected growth, not just for Stephanie but for me as well. I had learned that love sometimes requires difficult choices, that enabling is not the same as supporting, that forgiveness does not mean forgetting or removing consequences, that relationships built on honesty, even painful honesty, are stronger than those built on comfortable lies. Most importantly, I had learned that it is never too late to establish healthy boundaries, to require respect, and to allow those we love to experience the natural consequences of their actions. Sometimes, that is the greatest gift we can give them, and ourselves. The garden where I stood was entering autumn, Marian's favorite season. The dahlias she had planted years ago were in full bloom, their vibrant colors defiant against the approaching winter. Life continues, changes, adapts. Some plants die back completely, while others transform and emerge anew when conditions are right. Families are not so different. The betrayal that had seemed like an ending had become unexpectedly a new beginning. Not a perfect one, not an easy one, but one with authenticity and potential that the old relationship had lacked. What has your experience been with family betrayal? Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between enabling someone you love or holding them accountable? I found that true healing only began when I stopped protecting my daughter from consequences and started protecting her with them instead. Leave a comment sharing your story, and subscribe to hear more about family relationships that survived even the deepest betrayals. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most meaningful destinations.